Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another version or episode of Education Matters with Jim O'Connell. I'm very pleased to have you in the audience listening, and we're here live on Tuesday. And so, if you're watching this on Tuesday night, which is one of the 4 or 5 times that it's on during the week, you can call in. The call-in number should be on the screen right now, but it is 640-3091. That's 603-640-3091, and you're always welcome to offer your opinion on matters relating to Manchester, and in particular education in Manchester. So, in the coming weeks, I've sent out an invitation to all the current candidates for school board, and so they have an open invitation to come on and address you, or to tell us what it is their aims and ambitions are. I haven't yet reached out to the new candidates, those who are who have decided that they're going to run. But if any of you are listening to this, who are candidates or will be announcing your candidacy, I think we have until Friday to do so. Please accept this invitation. I'd be happy to have any candidate for school board on the show and have them say what they will. We may not agree, but that's not a condition of coming on this show. If your purpose is to explain to people what it is you support, etc. So I will try to reach out to some of those candidates as we go on. We will have somebody here with us next week as the first of those candidates who will be visiting our show. This is the final week prior to the special election in District 16 of our state senate, and the two main candidates there, of course, are Dave Booton and Kevin Kavanagh. So this time next week, when we're recording this show next week, it will already be at the very end of voting, which is the 25th. And so I'd like to just take a minute to talk about that race, because in the end we have Mr. Booton going back, who's already, I think, had 12 years in the Senate, and then he did not run this last time out, and so Scott McGilvery ran for that seat and won it. And sadly, Scott, who I think would have been a wonderful senator if life had been kinder to him, Scott passed away recently, and that's why we have this special election. And so we have Kevin Kavanagh, a Manchester alderman, who is running in this special election. In one sense, it's not that important, I guess. It's not that critical from the point of view that it's not going to change it that much in Concord. We have a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and a Republican governor. But I think every voice we send to Concord that represents Manchester fully is an important voice. And it may send a message too to those who would wish to defund public education, that it's something that the Manchester voters won't accept. I have to tell you that I'm a strong supporter of Kevin Kavanagh's. He's been unequivocal in his support for public education. He has a son in the community system in New Hampshire, and he has two children in the Manchester public school system, and is a strong supporter of it. On the other hand, Dave Booton, is from Hooksett. And certainly he's represented the district, which is wards 1, 2, and 12 in Manchester, plus Hooksett, Candia, Bow, and Dunbarton. I think that's the scope of that district. But what we've had recently in Manchester, or over the last number of years now, is that Manchester no longer speaks with a single voice in the State House, because through gerrymandering, the constituencies are such that little pieces of Manchester are taken off and added to a bunch of outlying districts, which means that Manchester's voice is diluted. And so we have somebody going up to the State House who has three wards of Manchester, but also represents Hooksett, Dunbarton, Bow, Candia, etc. And that means that they don't always do what is best for Manchester. They don't vote for Manchester's interests. They may well vote against Manchester's interests. So I think it's important to send somebody to represent Manchester. In the end, Manchester is the largest city in the state of New Hampshire. We used to have 1 in 10 kids from in the entire state used to go to Manchester public schools. It's now about 1 in 12 or 1 in 13, something like that. But it's still a very large number. And the fact that Manchester school system continues to be the least well-funded school system in the state is an aberration. And the downshifting of costs from the state of New Hampshire down to Manchester's property tax payers is unconscionable. I have to tell you that the choice, in my case, for choosing Kevin Kavanagh is an easy one because he already is an alderman in Manchester, has shown himself a friend to Manchester schools and to education generally, as opposed to, and just to, I think Mr. Booton is trying to, sit on the fence, and it's very hard to, he doesn't want to go too far to one extreme or the other. So he finds himself in difficulty with his with the right wing of his base because he opposes the elimination of of Obamacare, or at least the Medicaid expansion element of it, and so that's got him in some difficulty there. But my problem with Mr. Booton is that he, when last in power, had no problem with decimating public education in the state. And as an example of that, and the most clear example of that I would give you and remind you of, is that in the history of the United States, it is New Hampshire's dubious privilege to be the state that has implemented the largest cut to public education that's ever happened in the history of the United States. And that was done under the Bill O'Brien administration 4 or 5 years ago with the assistance and support and the vote of Mr. Booton, where they reduced the funding for the university system of New Hampshire by 50%. I think it might have been 47%, if to be exact and fair to everybody. But effectively, they cut half the funding to in the state of New Hampshire. Now, I have to tell you something. It makes no sense whatsoever. We're losing population, and we're finding it difficult to attract young, vibrant families to the state of New Hampshire because of this sort of backwards thinking. Our students, natives of New Hampshire, have got the highest student debt. They're carrying the highest student debt of any state in the United States. That is true, obviously, of all, not obviously, but it's true of all New Hampshire students, but that means it affects disproportionately affects the families of Manchester. That's a real cost. So those who are saying again that the holding fiscal lines and won't, we're doing the right thing by you and giving money back to the taxpayer, etc. Let's be very clear what's going on. When you eliminate 50% of the funding for the university system of New Hampshire, you pass that cost onto mums and dads and families all across the state. What you really do is those who have got large disposable incomes or who've had the wherewithal and good sense to put money aside in tax-free vehicles to fund the education of their children, they're immune from this, or the impact isn't so great. But a young man or woman in the city of Manchester who is middle class or worse still, somebody in poverty, the barrier to them going to university is just too high, and so they don't make it. And so what happens then is we end up with a population of people who are not equipped to take on the jobs of the 21st century. In regard to that, I have to say that I listened today to a discussion between Mr. Booton, Mr. Kavanagh, and the gentleman. I'm sorry I don't recall his name, but there is also a Libertarian candidate who's running for that Senate seat. And I hear these code words all the time now. Mr. Booton was talking about funding a program at Manchester Community College that's going to teach small engine repair. Now, I'm not elitist about small engine repair. I'm certainly not ignoring the fact that there is a need for young people to be educated in trades and technology and as technicians. There's certainly a place in the world. There's a place in the world for bus drivers. There's a place in the world for bartenders and waitresses. There's a place in the world for everybody in medicine, from admitting staff and LNAs all the way through to neurosurgeons. But you can't do neurosurgery with just administrative staff, and you cannot run an economy with a bunch of people trained to do small engine repair. And so I don't mean any respect to those of you who might be small engine repair specialists, but if the ambition of the politicians we're sending to Concord is that they're going to train your children and mine to repair lawnmowers, that's the future they see for them in 2060, 2070, 2080, and 2090, that's what they have, that's their plan. So the very person who votes for eliminating 50% of the funding for the university system of New Hampshire, millions and millions of dollars, wants you to believe that throwing a sop at you at Manchester Community College to train your children to fix lawnmowers, look at what we're doing, we're making the right efforts here in New Hampshire. I call BS, ladies and gentlemen. It's nonsense. It shouldn't be accepted. And these people ought to be just talked down and explained to that this is not the right thing to do. We need to have a professionally qualified workforce capable of carrying not just this city but this state and this country into the 21st century. The little country that I come from, which is a fly on the back of an elephant when it comes to world economics or politics or anything else, but the little country of Ireland, as an example, turns out 65,000 technical graduates a year. You go there and you'll see Boston Scientific, EMC, Facebook, Google, every Merck Sharp and Dome, Ciba Geigy, all the major pharmaceutical companies, Apple Computers, anybody, name all of them. I don't know, just name any major technology company in the world, and you'll find them with their either world headquarters or European headquarters sitting in the Greater Dublin or Greater Cork City area. I have nephews working in those companies. They all have come out of a free education system, with free university education, with or close to free. I think they pay $3,000 a year, and there was a revolution over that almost. But they come out with their master's degrees in computer science and information technology and engineering and green science and environmental science, etc. The South Koreans are doing it, the Germans are doing it, the Australians are doing it, they're doing it in Singapore, they're doing it in New Zealand, they're doing it in Finland, they're doing it in Norway, they're doing it all over the world. The great technology schools outside of St. Petersburg in Russia and in Moscow, the Polytechnique of Paris, there are people churning out highly qualified students. You go to India and there are PhDs being churned out on an annual basis, and our response here in the state of New Hampshire, and this is not a backwater when it comes to these matters, because the state of New Hampshire is sitting right in the heart of New England. We're part of Greater Boston, whether we like it or not. The old sort of 1980s word of conurbation of Greater Boston. And we live in a world economy, and our children, my children and yours, and our grandchildren are going to compete in a global economy. The fastest growing economies in the world right now, well, Brazil is the sixth biggest growing economy, growing at 8 to 10% per year. Africa is just booming, both in population terms and in economic terms and in developmental terms. Anybody who's got an image in their head of Africa with people in straw villages, dancing around an open fire with painted faces. That's a very early 20th century view of Africa. The modern Africa is building airports, bridges, roads. And doing it, let it be said, with a large amounts of Chinese money. And we're sitting here and we have people on the radio today in New Hampshire talking about opening a program. This was Mr. Boutin's answer today on New Hampshire Public Radio at 9 o'clock on a program called The Exchange, when challenged about defunding education in the state of New Hampshire, when challenged about having the least well-funded school system in the state of New Hampshire, when challenged about the fact that children in Manchester have less money spent on their education than the national average. When in the face of all of that, the answer was we need to put more money into where the jobs are at, down at the trade level. And at this point, we weren't talking about HVAC engineers. The example given was small engine repair courses at MCC. And I have to tell you, you can imagine how incensed I was listening to a 12-year veteran of our Senate, a man who is in many ways has been a leader of the Republican Party in the state of New Hampshire, a well-known voice on behalf of Republicanism, the party of fiscal conservatism, the party of strong business and of they would see us as strong security, strong business, and lead us into a well-developed future. And we're listening to Luddites and know-nothings and anti-educationalists who want to destruct as much as they possibly can. They're ripping money out of the system left, right, and centre. We're doing it in the most recent budget to the tune of $600 million. He made the point when talking on the radio today, Mr. Boutin was saying that they were forced during the recession to reduce the spending, to pass down the cost to cities, etc., because the state of New Hampshire had to reduce its spending, and it was forced to do so because of the recession, which, by the way, we know where that recession came from, right? When the Secretary of the Treasury is on his bended knee in the Obama White House, asking, begging, in the Bush White House, begging that they don't pull the plug on the entire economy. So, without going off into economics here, let's stick with the state election. And the example given was that it had to be done. Mr. Boutin would say that he cut education in the state of New Hampshire, in other words, increased costs to the property owners of Manchester, to the families who have children in education in Manchester. He did that because of a recession. What he doesn't tell you is that, and what a point I've made here before, is that simply is not true. Because what was done was the elimination of, they also eliminated income at the same time. So just like we just in the new budget for the next biennium, for the next 2 years, we've given money back to corporate America in the state of New Hampshire, while passing costs down to the local cities. Back then, when we were eliminating funding for the public school system and particularly for the university system, we passed a law that reduced the taxation on cigarettes in the state of New Hampshire, which cost us $27 or $29 million. And we did that, and I want to belabor it again because those of you who've watched this show before may have heard me a year ago or so talking about this. But we reduced taxes on cigarettes in a state where we already had the lowest priced cigarettes in all of New England. And the argument was that more people would buy cigarettes, which is farcical at its face. And as I said at the time, and I said it in discussions with state politicians and others, that the only argument you could make would be this farcical one about that people from Massachusetts would drive faster to the border to buy the cigarettes they were already buying. So it was a nonsense. It was part of an ideological bent, an ideological position, which is we'll reduce income to the state, and then we'll balance the budget, and wherever the figures fall out, they fall out. So 42 kids in a class in Manchester, fine according to the mayor, although he's taken that back since. But 30 kids in a classroom in Manchester all of last year in every single elementary school in the city, bar one. There were whole years, so whole grades with 30 kids in every class. And in the face of that, we still want to reduce spending. We want to give money back to taxpayers because we're fine with having warehousing for kids and not paying for an adequate education. But we're doing that while handing money back to taxpayers or to particular segments of the population. So the whole I listened to the gentleman on today who was talking about the decision at the state level to allow the town of Croydon to send its students to private schools. On the taxpayers' dime. So he was arguing in Dunbarton they need new schools. So his thought was that rather than build a new school system, which he admits they need in Dunbarton, which is part of District 16, what they should do is allow people to take their kids and send them to private schools. Now, the data says, contrary to what you might hear people who don't believe in science or facts talking about, the data says that young people, in particular in charter schools, that young people who are educated in charter schools are no better educated than they are in public schools on average. So it is at best it is a wash. But it has huge negative effects elsewhere. But if you just want to talk about outcomes, anybody who believes that a charter school is going to produce a set of kids, like any 10 kids going to a charter school and any 10 kids going to the public school, that somehow the charter school will produce better results. The facts state that they don't. Some charter schools are horrendous. Some charter schools actually produce terrible results, and some produce good results. Just like if you look in the state of New Hampshire at the public school system, or if you look in the city of Manchester at the public school system, and depending on which school you go to and where you go, the results vary. And in the end, we know that the real determinants of educational outcomes has more to do with socioeconomic status than anything else, because we can predict that at the very outset. So in an ideal world, we could do an academic exercise and we could just use the socioeconomic variables only. Let's just say straight up income variables, and we could predict results out over a 20-year lifetime. So a kid born in 2017 to a family earning $20,000 a year will have this set of results in 20 years from now, and a kid born to a family with a family income of $150,000 per year will have this set of results. And we can pretty much predict that today, and we know where that is. And sadly, in some senses, that's I hate to say that's the way it is, but it shouldn't come as any surprise to us, right? The experiences of a young person growing up in a family that has the ability to provide proper nutrition, adequate daycare, responsible adults in their lives, modeling positive behaviors, born into families with rich vocabularies and rich environments, and rich in this sense, I mean in terms of the things that they have around them. They get to travel, perhaps. They experience more of the world. They're more likely to have spent time visiting Boston or on trips to New York or whatever it might be. Whereas the kid with the family on $15,000 a year, well, he's probably, he or she has a less rich environment in which they grow. So we know that at the outset, over 20 years, that's where it's all going to fall out. And we can't change the world. I understand that there are some sort of realities that exist, and that's just how that is. However, we should, as a thoughtful and compassionate society, seek to at least ameliorate those problems. Let's knock the edges off the sharp edges of those problems, at very least. At least be cognizant of the fact that people, the idea in our Constitution that all people are created equal is a wonderful thought. But we know they're not even created equal at the time of, at the moment of coming out of the womb, given issues around nutrition or abuse or whatever that in vitro that children before birth may have. There may be consequences to them, but certainly from the moment of birth onwards, the idea of created equal dissipates pretty quickly and has very little truth to it by the time a young man or woman grows up. So, as a society, we can turn our back on this and ignore it and say it doesn't matter, or we can seek to redress it in some way. The appalling thing in the state of New Hampshire is, if we think about it, we know that this is true, that there's a straight up line between academic achievement, not absolute. It doesn't mean that it's predetermined. It doesn't mean that a kid who is born into a family with income of $15,000 a year will be a failing student or will not be the valedictorian at West or Central or Memorial. It's not impossible. We just know that statistically it's less and less likely. What's appalling about the state of New Hampshire is, not alone do we not take action to recognize this at all, even though it's in our own self-interest to do it, not just out of altruism, not just out of Christian values or Judeo-Christian worldview, not out of a humanitarian worldview, but out of a very practical, utilitarian, doing logically what is the best thing for oneself point of view. We should be seeking to raise as many people out of poverty and make them as viable as possible, both in terms of, so that they can contribute to the growth of our society and make our society stronger, but also because they won't be relying upon services that we might have to be supplying as time goes on. But so it's in our own self-interest to lift as many people out of poverty as possible, and the easiest way of doing that, and the most equitable way of doing that, is to allow people access to equal educational opportunity. In the state of New Hampshire, as I pointed out in a discussion recently, if you map out the areas of least socioeconomic vibrancy, let me put that in English maybe, the poorest areas of the state of New Hampshire, if you map them out, and then you take a map of the school districts in the state, and you map out the school districts that are the least well-funded, and you take the map of the poorest people with the greatest needs, and you take the map of the school systems with the least amount of money being spent in them, and you overlay one over the other, and the footprints match. So not alone are we doing nothing to ameliorate the problem in the state of New Hampshire, we're actually aggravating it. Because if you take a town like, at the extreme, let's take a town like Newcastle on the seacoast, where they spend $30,000, $31,000 or $32,000 per student per year. I don't know if it's the richest town in the state, but if it isn't, it's pretty close to it. Rye, you look at the numbers in the towns in the state of New Hampshire that, Wolfboro, towns that have some affluence. And you will also see that they've got the best educational facilities, they've got the best paid teachers, they've got the lowest pupil-teacher ratios, they've got the highest per capita spending. So that's the nature of the state of New Hampshire where we are. And so then to send somebody like Mr. Boutin, if you're a voter in Manchester in wards 1, 2, or 12, or if you're in Hooksett, and I don't know if anybody outside of that area will see this program, but sending somebody up to Concord whose answer to this type of problem for the future is he wants to boast about, small engine repair funding at Manchester Community College. I have to tell you, there are wonderful things going on at Manchester Community College, and Manchester Community College is a real and viable option for young people seeking to enter advanced education and to get a great education, to get it without spending the ridiculous amount of money that some universities seek. So there are wonderful things happening at Manchester Community College. I'm not downplaying MCC. I'm appalled that a public representative seeking to be a senator in the state of New Hampshire wants to talk about two-stroke engine, little engine repair as part of the solution for the kids of the city of Manchester. I reject that view out of hand, and I think voters should do the same thing. I think the answer should be disqualifying, frankly. I think it should be, if that's your answer to what you want to do for the education of the kids of the state of New Hampshire, whether you have kids in the system or not, whether your kids are out of education, whether they were never in education, wherever you are across the spectrum, it should be disqualifying that somebody has that answer. Let's see, we have somebody here calling in. Go ahead, caller. What's your name?
Yeah.
Hi. Go ahead. You're on air.
I'm on the air. Okay. I'd like to say welcome to our country.
Thank you.
And I think you're a bit disingenuous, like when you're using Newcastle as an example to Manchester.
Well, let me just stop you there before you said, I did say when I mentioned, I said if you want to take the extreme, those were my words, right? I said, you want to take the extreme, like Newcastle. So I didn't represent Newcastle as being, I deliberately said, if you want to take the extreme of the case, you look at a town like Newcastle and Wolfboro and Rye. So go ahead, but I was being clear in what I was saying. There was nothing disingenuous about that.
It's an affluent old community that probably has about 200 residents. And
it has a high school.
Besides the grammar school, they send their children to Portsmouth High School, and they have the option of going to Phillips Exeter.
Right.
It's ridiculous that you say that. As far as Manchester goes, why don't we do like a little urban renewal program where we tear down all of our triple deckers, because we have an outrageous influx of low-income people coming to Manchester, where over 50% of the students are on free lunch. It's showing that we have a problem. We're rejuvenating the mill yard with high-tech jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we get rid of these triple-deckers and we have a street grid and build nice homes instead of being an attraction? It's like we're a picnic and we're attracting ants to the party. It's totally ridiculous.
So let me just ask you. So you think it would be viable? I'm just wondering. You think that a policy, and I'm not trying to trick you to any answer. I'm just wondering what you actually mean. Are you suggesting that the city of Manchester have a program that it begin to acquire some of those properties by eminent domain, and then literally acquire them and demolish them and start to build middle class housing or better housing? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, if we're trying to revitalize our downtown area and our mill yard area now with Dean Kamen and all these fantastic people down there are doing wonders with the mill yard, we need housing for these highly educated people that are coming to Manchester.
Right.
And we have a grid system, behind the Verizon and everywhere else. The triple deckers were built for the mills back in 1864.
Right.
They're antiquated. Back in the 70s, we had an urban renewal program where the government came in and they put windows and siding. They put a Band-Aid on all these old buildings that are dilapidated. They're all fire hazards.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get a Manchester urban renewal program. Let's get people in Manchester let's get the Viviers and the Peliquins and the Brady Sullivans and everyone to coordinate and have a think tank with the city and with the government, and let's demolish all this crap.
So
we have our drugs and our heroin and the scourge coming into the city.
Right.
And let's build nice neighborhoods to revitalize Manchester.
Right, so that sounds nice, but let's be clear, right? We have a city government for the last 8 years that doesn't want to spend a dime on any programs anywhere. So we're borrowing money right now to pave our streets, right? We have school.
He doesn't have any dimes.
So
Manchester's a poor town.
So where would the
Our Mayor Gaddis, is doing a fantastic job with the 10 morons that he has on the aldermanic board.
But if you were on, let me interrupt you a minute. Let me interrupt you for
the communists that he has on the school department.
If you so,
it's ridiculous.
So
and then when you get a person like you, an outsider, that comes in.
Thank you.
Did they pay for your steerage to come here? Because it's like, since you got to Manchester, all you do is knock Manchester. Manchester's not bad. Manchester needs a help.
Can I interrupt you a minute? Just a minute. So the person right now in Manchester this afternoon, who's calling it drug infested and having heroin problems, who wants to come in and bulldoze families, poor families, out of their houses because you want to build gentrified middle class housing, you think that you represent the solution? That's the solution. I consider that a very, very, very drastic and draconian solution to the city of Manchester's problems. There are lots of great things happening in Manchester, and I talk about them all the time. And we can have this discussion.
You want to do yourself a favor?
Yeah.
Sneak in some morning over at the JFK Coliseum when they're doing the breakfast for all the low-income children, and you will see those kids that they don't even want to eat the food, and it's like the old movie Animal House. They're throwing the food at each other. And then the poor college kids that are there have to go sweep the food up, and all the kids laugh at them and say, "That's your job, do it."
So what are you saying? What are you saying?
Just cut. Will go to Sheridan Emmett Field, and they'll clean the field for everybody. And at the end of the afternoon, the field is totaled, and all these kids will say, "That's your job, clean it up," as they put shite all over the field.
Okay, so I think you're losing the plot, to be honest, because you're now saying that poor kids in Manchester don't need food and that they're just throwing it around what are you saying?
What I'm saying is Manchester, we're attracting the wrong element.
Oh, I see.
And if we want to put blame, I'm not blaming the Democrats. We can blame Mayor Wazorek because he took the money for sidewalks to make Manchester a destination city. In Manchester, we're circling the toilet bowl.
Right. So I'm going to let you go. But I disagree with most of what you said, as you won't be surprised to hear.
No doubt you would. But
yeah.
I want to, with welcome arms, welcome you to our community. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. So I don't understand the need for the ad hominem attack. So I don't understand why one would. Why one wants to go there. So that gentleman is very upset at the residents of Manchester because he thinks we're lowering our standards or something. I got to tell you, whoever you may be, I don't like your comments and the nastiness of your welcoming to Manchester comments. I welcome you to Manchester. I'm glad you've been here for a couple of generations. What you say doesn't bear scrutiny because it would be fascism. It would be right-wing lunacy to come in and bulldoze families out of their homes in Manchester. That's it's unethical. It's unworkable. It's just a ridiculous point of view, sir, if you don't mind me saying so. It is nonsensical. That is a brainless solution that only somebody who doesn't understand the nature of society or the nature of the problems that we face could come up with. So I think you should do a lot more thinking, perhaps read a little, get a little education, and be a little more tolerant of those people around you. Manchester is a great city because if I didn't think it was, I wouldn't be here. I'm here by choice, remember. So thank you for your call. I think you should probably take a pill and relax a little bit. And when you're ready to have a conversation about some real issues and about some real solutions, we can have those. But, talking about the poor families of Manchester and wanting to bulldoze them out of their houses, I got to tell you, I would suggest you've got a little bit of learning to do. I wish you well. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. If that's yours, well, fair enough. I just think it's a horrible opinion. So, and the piece about welcoming me to Manchester, and thank you very much. That's so magnanimous of you. Um, all right, so back to what we were saying. In the end, you get we all get the politicians that we deserve, and Manchester could resolve its issues better than it has been by simply not wanting to join in the race to the bottom. The race to the bottom that Manchester is on is that it refuses to in the case of education, it refuses to properly fund it. So just this year, for instance, the town of Nashua is spending twice in the increase in spending in Manchester in Nashua is roughly twice what it is in the city of Manchester. And as I said to many people before, and I point to my friend who just called in, you go to a town like Dover, who announced last year they're spending $84 million on a new high school, and they're going to lead the effort to attract the nicest families, the best families, the families who are interested in having a good education into the town of Dover by saying, look at us, we value education, we want to keep people here. What Manchester has been doing is it has been putting its hand up. We've already chased away. We've had Mayor Gatsis in his bullying way push the people of Hooksett and Candia and Auburn out the door. And make no mistake about it, if you believe in democracy, I don't know if that gentleman does, because he thinks bulldozers and bulldozing voters out of the properties they own is viable, which is just farcical. Believe me, it makes no sense at all. I've heard some libertarian lunatics speak, and most of them haven't gone to that extent. Well, what we have done is we've pushed those people out, and it's very clear. You know, when the town of Candia held its vote about whether to leave Manchester schools or not, and this is just about schools, they voted 9-1 in favour of getting out of Manchester because of the deal that their children were getting in Manchester. And the only people defending this nonsense, there are people who are the people we've had on our school board. Over the years, the number of them who, as soon as they've had children themselves, have taken them and put them into private school or have moved out of town and moved someplace else after having done the damage to the Manchester school system. So I'm a great believer in the city of Manchester. I've been here a long time, 20 years in the city of Manchester, 24 years in the United States. I'm proud of Manchester. I have 4 Manchester children. My wife's a graduate of West High School. My oldest daughter's a graduate of Central High School. My son just graduated Central High School. I have 2 children at Central High School. Amazing work has been done. The years that I spent at Hillside Middle School and the parents who were there and the work that they did to make that the great school that it is today, there are all kinds of good things can be done by people who don't just talk but actually go out and get something done. I go back to my criticism of the people that we sent to Concord when we send people down to Congress whose aim is to destroy the Department of Education and to reduce funding there. The same people, perhaps the people who want to bulldoze poor people out of their houses, will also vote for statewide politicians who will go up to Concord and send reduce funding on public education up there and send money send costs back down to Manchester, and then they have the gall to talk about what's going on in Manchester School. We have another caller, I think. Sorry, caller, I just missed you. If you want to call in again, I'd be happy to hear you. There is someone there now. Hi there. Go ahead. You're on the air.
Yes, Jim.
Hi. Who is?
Listen to you on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
You do nothing but bash Mayor Gatsis. I got a different angle here.
Okay.
Mayor Gatsis has to present a budget that stays under the tax cap. He didn't vote. The people of Manchester voted for the tax cap.
Right.
Why aren't you going after the Dan O'Neills, the Pat Longs, the Barbara Shaws of Manchester? That's all they have to do is override the tax cap.
Right.
And they can get as much money as they want.
Right.
And whatever they decide the budget will be, they override the tax cap. They get the votes, and then, but you know what it is? They're afraid.
Right.
They're afraid to do it because it's politically, it'll be political suicide.
Right.
So instead of going after Gatsis, why don't you go after your Democratic buddies? Because they're the ones that really
Right.
set the numbers.
Right.
Not
Okay.
Mayor Gatsby.
Well.
He's got to stay under that 1%.
Okay. You know
I mean,
what? I think.
under the tax cap,
Right.
that's the budget he has to present.
Right. I think. I think you'll be surprised to hear that I think you have a point. Actually. I'm sorry, you just gone there. So I actually think you have a point. I do know that Mayor Gatsas, as powerful as he might think he is, in the end, he's just one person. He is the mayor. He does have the bully pulpit. But in the end, you're absolutely right. The board of mayor and aldermen do have the ability to override, and they could do it, and they have. I think 3 times in the last 4 or 5 years they have overridden it to one degree or the other. Even Joe Kelly Levasseur, who dances around like a on this issue, saying I didn't really override the capital, I only overrode part of it, etc. Because it is politically difficult. I do understand that. I think it is true that the blame does not belong with Mayor Gatsas alone, and to demonize him would be incorrect. And I think you have a point there. And I actually think that it may come across that way because that's how I sort of look at it. But I do take your point. There are people, be they Democrat or Republican, on the board, mayor and aldermen, who haven't had the courage to actually fund our school system the way it should be. So I actually take your point. I would say this about Mayor Gatsas and the tax cap. If Mayor Gatsas wanted to, he could bring in the tax cap, like you say, as required by a charter. There's no reason why at the same time he couldn't say, but I got to tell you, this is the budget that I'm forced to introduce because the charter demands it. But as the leader of this city and as somebody who's got the future of this city in mind, I know that council member or alderman A, B, and C have put together a budget. This tax cap budget is not going to meet our needs this year. There's nothing stopping him saying that. But he has not said that. He insists that everything is fine. For most of his tenure as the mayor of Manchester, his mantra has been everything's fine. There's nothing wrong here. Don't look at it. We spent the early years blaming the contributing towns that just tell them that if they don't like it, they can take a hike because they can't get better anyplace else. Well, it turns out they could, and they did, and they ride. Some of them ride on buses every day through the whole length of Manchester, from the north to the south, to go to schools. That they're getting a better deal in than they were getting from the city of Manchester. So. He was wrong there. Others were wrong there as well. But you're right. Whether it's Pat O'Neill or Pat Long or the other Barbara Shaw and the others that you mentioned, believe me, if you don't know this already, I've gone toe to toe and head to head with all of them. I was talking with Pat Long on this network 4 months ago, where his answer to me was, but Jim, listen, just give me, we got to have something we can handle. We can only bite off small pieces. Don't be giving me the whole, I'm tired of listening to the big thing, he said. He said, give me something that we can do because we can't do it all. My argument with Pat Long is, yes, we can do it all. If in all it means that we can do better than being the worst in the state. I think the day that we became the least well-funded school system in the state, and the day that we had the highest number of children per classroom in the state, I think that Pat Long, Dan O'Neill, Barbara Shaw, Joe Kelly Levasseur, Bill Shea, who I respect as the long-term alderman that he is, but all of them, everybody, Democrat and Republican, they actually own the problems in the city of Manchester. And in 20 years from now, the people who have served on that board over the last 10 years will have no place to hide. And I agree with you, caller, that if their answer is, I was just an alderman and it was really Ted Gatsas did it, that's a very poor place to be trying to hide, because you had a vote and you didn't vote. So, we might not agree on a lot, sir, but I don't think any of them have any place to hide. I go back to Joyce Craig, who, by the way, I believe that, I'm hoping that Joyce Craig actually wins and becomes mayor. But I will say this about Joyce Craig. When Joyce was an alderman, and she managed to cobble together $2 million extra to save some of the programs in our schools, and it was a touch and go thing. And at the last minute, she managed to put a constituency together, a coalition of people together, and they found extra money from various sources and found an extra $2 million for the schools. And I'll tell you something, whether that others will know if you don't. But in the immediate aftermath of that, I spoke to then Alderman Joyce Craig, and she was her attitude was, well, we managed to, whatever the words, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but look what we did. We got the extra $2 million, and I think Joyce Craig was expecting me to say, as the president of Citizens for Manchester Schools, to say, that's great, I'm so grateful. And I didn't, and I haven't ever. And I said to her, and she didn't like this, and even though I consider her a friend, I said to her, I'm delighted you managed to do what you did, and I think the children of Manchester are better off because of it, and we are grateful, and thank you. But don't ask me to be happy about it. Because what really should have happened is we should have not fired 164 teachers. We shouldn't have gotten rid of half the English language and learner teachers in our middle schools. We shouldn't have got rid of foreign languages in our middle schools. We shouldn't have fired SROs. We shouldn't have got rid of programs for special need kids. We shouldn't have got rid of programs for kids in need. But we did all of that. And you want me to be thankful that we cobbled together an extra $2 million? So, caller, I'm not saying that I have the moral high ground all the time and I'm Mr. All principle and perfection, but there's lots of blame to go around here, and I got to tell you, if I were on the school board or the board, if I were on the board of mayor and alderman tomorrow, there would be an issue that would come up at every meeting, and might be embarrassing for everybody, and it might even become a laughing thing, but I would be there every single 2 weeks, and I would be bringing this issue up, that as a matter of urgency, we need to do something about the fact that our school system is the least well-funded school system in the state, and I would bring it up ad nauseum. I'm not there, and I don't do it because I don't believe it's going to be effective, and I don't think that those bodies are in a place where they're going to do those things right now. And I think I think more can be done by someone like me, by pulling levers and making phone calls on the back end and trying to put constituencies together and have people understand. And on the other hand, I think this is important for everybody and anybody listening to this show. One of the real things people can do is to get off their behinds and to go out and help our schools. There's always work that can be done. There's renewal and painting and decorating and fundraising and contributing support in lots of different ways. Some of our principals who are working 70 and 80 hours a week would be delighted with the assistance. So I think it's important to do that too, and not just be a talking shop, et cetera, et cetera. But I just think we have so many things in Manchester that are right, that the biggest piece that's left has to do with the public education system in Manchester. Everybody knows it. I think the two topics that anybody, if you were an alien landing here from outer space tomorrow and you were to look at this dispassionately, you would say the two biggest issues facing Manchester are the opiate crisis and the issues around that, and both the image and the actuality of our school system. I've said before, and I'll say it here again. I think the opiate crisis is something that does need continued work on, and it needs an awful lot more work than we've been doing. We live in a state where a young man with autism was kept in a bed in an emergency room for 28 consecutive days last month because there was no place to put him, and in the end he had to be taken to Massachusetts because we've decided to give money back to fat cats and people who don't need it. Because that's the legislature that we have, and they refuse to fund programs properly. We have a DCYF that's a disgrace. We have a foster care system that is desperately in need of help. Children on the margins of our society are being badly dealt with. It is well known that the state of New Hampshire has few services or no services, no, it's not true, but few services for people with mental health disabilities, etc. And that's a disgrace. And so the children within our school systems, the most vulnerable children in our school systems, our special education children, our children on our poverty-stricken kids are we don't have the programs in place to help those. And we have politicians who want to run for office in Ward 1, 2, and 12 on radio today saying that they're introducing a program at MCC so that kids can learn how to do small engine repair. I'm sure they'd love the children of impoverished people and the least well off in our society to go back to, hammering tin cans under the bridge. That's too harsh. But their answer is to say, it's not to lift people up and offer them the opportunities that they should have and that any modern society would give. But they have cut programs in the past, cut them massively, and now they want to throw some sop at it of $100,000 here or $50,000 there, and say, "Look at the wonderful thing we're doing." It is entirely wrong, and people should be held to account for their votes and be asked to do the right thing. The City of Manchester will continue so long as. So on the two things, sorry, just to finish on the opiate crisis, I believe the thing with the opiate crisis is that every town suffers from the opiate crisis today, and so people can't be sitting in Sunapee or in Bedford or someplace saying, "Oh, look at the opiate crisis, isn't that a terrible thing in Manchester?" because it's a terrible thing in their own backyard, and they see it every day. What is not in their own backyard and what's unique to Manchester, or close to unique to Manchester, is that we have an administration led by a mayor who has not overseen the proper funding of education in the City of Manchester, refuses to tackle that problem in the way that it should be tackled, and he and the others should be held to account at the ballot box, and we should be electing people whose number one priority is to make Manchester school system a shining example of education in the state of New Hampshire. Nothing less should be acceptable to Manchester voters. That's what people should be offering us, and that's what we should be demanding of them. Thank you to the people who called in tonight. I'm sorry one gentleman was very upset, but we're always willing to accept calls from people, whatever their views might be. Thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you this time next week. If you're watching, it'll be the 25th, and it'll be right at the very end of the voting time for the District 16 seat. Thanks a lot, folks. See you in a week. Good night and goodbye from Jim O'Connell.